Wow, you know how sometimes when you have a bad night of sleep, you just feel like the world is ending? That's how I feel right now. But I'm staying I'm keeping the faith. I'm staying positive. I am staying the course. And even though I may or may not have missed a little bit of time, perhaps 2 days, I will be I will be picking up where I left off, which is on page 93. People oh Other news in my life is that um really nothing has been going on actually. I'm going on a trip starting tomorrow. So I don't know if I'm going to read like in the morning. Oh, hello. Thanks for coming. The cake was really good. Honestly, I think it was like a little bit drier than expected, but not bad. I was happy with it. I was really, really nervous that it was going to be uncooked in the middle because when I first did the toothpick test, things didn't go well. But then I think I overbaked it. But it definitely had enough butter. I'm gonna be in the airport tomorrow, so either I can read in the airport, unlikely, or I can read before I go. I don't even know what time my flight is. I'm going to Los Angeles for this is kind of like a dumb reason to go across the country, and I'm probably a climate criminal for this, but I had to go to Portland anyway for a secret work-related thing, and I figured like, oh, Los Angeles is like partially there. And if I go, I can just like see a bunch of friends. There's 2 birthday parties. I can help one of my friends move. So I'm gonna be going to Los Angeles tomorrow. And then Portland, which was that one I don't feel as much of a criminal for, even though I am. But I like to think that even though I do fly a lot more than I should, probably more than the average person, at least I don't eat meat. So anyway. Um okay, page 93. I'm so sleepy. The next day, Mrs. Moskowitz took Moses to see the governor-elect in his apartment at the Biltmore Hotel. Oh, right. Mrs. Moskowitz was like the weird short lady who was like psyoping the mayor. Like she was just sitting next to him and like telling him what to do. Kind of got to respect it. There was an interesting news story. A couple years ago there was a news story about how the president of Korea literally did that. Like his I'm probably gonna butcher the details, but maybe like 5 or 10 years, probably 5 years ago, the president of Korea was being like extremely influenced by a sort of like woo-woo, crazy, like energy, spirituality type woman who was recommending things for like bizarre reasons that didn't, and it was a big scandal. Okay, but that's how Mrs. Moskowitz is being to the new mayor of New York City after the really progressive Mitchell, the new guy, forgot his name, but the new guy was part of the Smith. He was part of the really powerful Tammany Hall posse, and he Nancy Reagan consulting astrologers. Yeah, it's exactly like that. But yeah, Smith is not really that progressive, but Robert Moses can get his in is this weird lady, Mrs. Moskowitz, who always talks to Smith. The meeting between Moskowitz, Moses, and the governor-elect was brief and cordial. When Mrs. Moskowitz introduced Moses, all Smith said was that if this young man was her choice for the job, he was sure Dr. Moses would do a good job. From the I don't know why I said that. Oh no, I snoozed it. Sorry. Okay, we're sorry. That was really scary. Someone. Oh no, There's absolutely no. I don't think that I have it in me to read all. How many volumes of there are the Lyndon B. Johnson biography? I feel like there's like 4 volumes that are all this long, but it plus or minus 1. Like it could be 3, it could be 5. I really think that like this one is personally testing me It feels like running a marathon, honestly, in terms of, like, the length of time until I complete my goal, and yeah, maybe it's good for me. It's nice to have goals that are, like, 3 months in the future. Okay. Dr. Moses would do a good job. From the Biltmore, she took the new appointee straight to the Hall of Records at the corner of Chambers and Lafayette Streets, where a whole section of the third floor had been allocated to the commission to show him his office, a large, handsomely appointed room that was the first office of his own that Moses had ever had. The commission's work was to get underway immediately. Mrs. Moskowitz said, Bob should start hiring his staff at once. The Bureau of Municipal Research, where only a day before, Moses had been working just 4 blocks away from the Hall of Records. Oh, the Bureau was just 4 blocks away from the Hall of Records, but Moses had come in that day a long way from the Bureau by any measurement other than distance. He had been looked down on by his associates there as a loudmouth and a failure. Now, after a single phone call from a woman he hardly knew, he was suddenly in a position to call those associates and invite them to apply to him for jobs. Bob Moses was never to learn why, of all the brilliant, dedicated reformers she knew, Belle Moskowitz had picked him for the first official job. She had had it in her power to dispense. Perhaps it was because she had heard about him from her husband. Perhaps it was because, of all those reformers, it was he who had most strongly caught her shrewd and appraising eye. Whatever the reason, he never learned it. But he was able to find out from reformer acquaintances how she had come to be so trusted by Al Smith, the governor-elect, that he had given her that power. Most reformers regarded Smith as the epitome of all that they detested in the Tammany politician. Not only was he uneducated and uncouth, he was his spitting and drinking were legends. Spitting? Is spitting a euphemism for something, or is he literally like... But more importantly, is he spitting bars? What is the mayor, or what is the governor spitting? Also, yeah, he's the governor. I got that mixed up in my recap. That's kind of a important detail. He took Tammany's orders unquestioningly. For years, he had been boss Charlie Murphy's chief henchman in Albany, and as president of the Board of Aldermen during Mitchell's mayoralty, he had led the opposition that outsmarted and defeated the boy mayor at every turn. Al Smith's ethics, according to most reformers, matched his habits. But a handful of reformers, those who actually had occasion to work with Smith, had astounded their friends even before his nomination for governor by arguing not only that Smith was not a typical Tammany politician, but that this red-faced, jut-nosed, gold-toothed, harsh-voiced smoker of big cigars and wearer of brown derbies and suits with wide stripes was, in fact, the best hope that existed for the actual enactment into law of the social welfare measure for which they had fought so long with so little real success. Dude, nobody writes sentences with as many commas as I have never in my life. I'm pretty sure I have never once in my entire life. I would bet a meager $20. Not meager. I think that's a decent amount of money. I would bet $20 that I have never read a book that uses more commas per sentence than this book. I'm sure it'd be really, really easy to calculate that. You would just have to do some simple regex. Sometimes people forget that I have the programming skills of a little child. Like, I can do small stuff. The broker of run-on sentences. Yeah, for real. The comma broker. The sentence broker. Okay. One of this handful of pro-Smith reformers Moses was told by his acquaintances was Belle Moskowitz. She was, they said, among the most enthusiastic of the group. She had, in fact, come to see in Smith the instrument through which her dreams for the poor people of New York City would become realities. Oh, background information for you that are just coming in. I got 3 hours of sleep last night for no reason except that I was being a dummy. Dummy head. Dumb. Should not have had Diet Coke so late. Shouldn't have been watching TV. My own fault. The gubernatorial election of 1918 had been the first in New York State in which women were allowed to vote. Uncertain how to appeal to the new voters, Smith had felt he needed a woman active in female civic organizations who could sell him to such groups. Most of the female do-gooders around town wanted nothing to do with Smith's campaign, but Belle volunteered eagerly. However similar their ultimate aims were to turn out to be, Smith had nothing but contempt for typical reformers. Regarding them as wild-eyed, impractical, and most important, incapable of producing results, he called them crackpots. Women reformers, he had found, were invariably crackpots. This guy seems a little bad. Women, he felt, didn't belong in politics anyway. In the tight little tenement Irish world in which he lived, most of them confined their interests to their homes and their children, and that was how it should be. He was prepared to listen to his new adviser with no more than token interest. He agreed only reluctantly to her suggestion that he address a luncheon of the Women's University Club. Uneducated, he felt he would be out of place before an audience of college graduates. He planned to make a brief talk filled with platitudes and as hasty an exit as possible. Sitting on the dais, D-A-I-S, do not know what, I'm Googling it. What is the D-A-I-S? Usually when words are really short, I feel like I should know them. A dais is a low platform for a lectern, comma, seat of honor, comma, or a throne. Okay, so while he was sitting on the dais, looking down on the audience of smartly dressed women chattering over fruit cocktail, his misgivings increased. What the hell am I going to say to a bunch of women like this? He growled. Oh, dais. Maybe everyone knows that word. Maybe I don't do enough public speaking events at fancy university clubs. I've never heard of a dais. I've heard of a lectern, a platform. Okay. If you're smart, the motherly lady by his side replied. To this bunch of women, you'll make the same speech you'd make to a bunch of businessmen. Taken aback, Smith decided to give it a try. He spoke on the economic issues of the campaign. A master at gauging crowd reaction, he saw as he spoke that the technique was succeeding, and when he was finished, the reception was as enthusiastic as the ones he received in Tammany clubhouses. Smith had been given almost no chance to win. Tammany's strength was traditionally more than offset in statewide campaigns by the combination of the solid core of educated, independent, anti-Tammany voters in New York City and the solidly Republican, rural, Protestant, prohibitionist strongholds upstate. Interesting. So Tammany is like, I know like political parties have changed over time, but it's taking me a second to like remember that Republican, rural, Protestant, prohibitionist goes together, and I'm like, all right, that makes sense to me. But then the other side is educated, independent, anti-Tammany. Tammany is like the Republicans. I didn't know that. Smith realized that he must win over the independent voters, but in the early stages of the campaign, he had been having little success. After the luncheon, he began to rely more and more on Belle Moskowitz for advice in handling them. And when, thanks in part to a hefty chunk of their support, he had won the governorship and called a conference at the Biltmore apartment to map out his program, and had invited her to attend. Smith told the room of burly Irishmen that, because of the inefficiency and duplication of effort he had observed during his 12 years as a state assemblyman, he wanted to reform the state's administrative machinery. The plump little Jewish matron sitting among them had long wanted such reform too, because without improvement in the machinery of government, it was useless to talk about the social reforms of which she had long dreamed. When Smith asked for ideas on how to start a drive for administrative reform, Belle had one ready. Even before he took office in January, she said, he should form a commission for reconstruction, retrenchment, and reorganization in the state government. Exciting times. Ugh. Sorry, I just realized I have a credit card. I should not show you that. Not you guys that are here. You're trustworthy, probably. Just the randos that see it later. Man, I'm really bad at remembering my spot. To the bluff old Irish leaders seated around the little matron, her suggestion had seemed like one they would expect from a reformer. They waited for her to talk about all the benefits that would accrue to mankind from such a commission. Slipping the word retrenchment into the commission title would be a great public relations divide, Mrs. Moskowitz had said quietly, connoting, as it did, economy and prudence. Smith had been elected because of the support he had been able to draw from independent voters and Republicans, Mrs. Moskowitz had continued. If he wanted to be re-elected, he had to keep such support. The state's Republicans, as they all knew, were divided into two branches. One was the GOP's regular organization, bossed by arch reactionary William Big Bill Barnes of Albany. They all have like little nicknames and quotes in the middle. Like, remember how the governor, isn't he called like Red Mike or something? I love that. We really need more of this. I wonder if having nicknames that go in quotes between your first and last name, I wonder if that's something that used to be more common. We really need to bring that back. I think that it's I love it. I think that is really fun. Mike the Situation, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I can only think of a handful. Annie Info Gobbler Roward. That's definitely like one to put in the running, but I don't know if Gobbler doesn't roll off the tongue super. I don't know if I would want to be Gobbler. It sounds a little Yeah, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but I don't know if I want to be Info Gobbler. There's something about it that I don't love, but I don't hate it. But also I think that maybe it's just because I'm tired. I don't know if it's just because I'm tired or what, but my reading pace is so slow. But I don't mind it. I think it's just because I'm thinking slow. Have you guys ever heard that factoid? Don't know if it's true, but I feel like it probably is because I've heard it from people that I trust, that some languages are really fast. Blah, 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 blah. Other languages are really slow. Like the words that come out are really slow. You know, like words per minute type rates. But the languages that are spoken really quickly, lots of words, each of those words tends to not have a lot of meaning. You have to say a bunch of words to get your intended message across, whereas the languages that are spoken more slowly, like fewer words per sentence, they're really like the words are very dense with meaning. And so in reality, even though people speak all these different languages, you get information at about the same rates, which suggests that the limits to the speed of communication is not how fast your mouth and your voice box can make sounds. It's not that, it's how quickly your brain can process it. Kind of interesting. There was a paper about it. At one point, I definitely had it bookmarked, but I never ended up reading it. I just trusted the summary that I read on Twitter. Anyway, that was really an aside. Okay. Okay, so the state's Republicans were divided into two branches. There was the regular organization bossed by arch-reactionary William Big Boss Barnes of Albany, which ran the state in an atmosphere of such corruption that GOP legislators were known as the Black Horse Cavalry because of their looting expeditions against the state treasury. Wow. The other branch was the GOP's federal crowd, which contained most of the party's impulse to public good and had earned its title by the distinguished service rendered in Washington by Charles Evan Hughes and a cadre of stalwarts of the progressive Republican movement that had swept Theodore Roosevelt to the governorship of the state and then to the presidency. Elihu Root, TR's Secretary of State, Henry L. Stimson, later Secretary of War, and George W. Wickersham, later Attorney General. The federal crowd had been pressing for administrative and social welfare improvements for years. They would be enthusiastic about a Reconstruction, Retrenchment, and Reorganization Commission. In fact, they would be happy to serve on it, and they would tend to feel kindly toward the governor who had asked them to. The regular Republicans, who would see in talks of Reconstruction a threat to their control of the state government, could be expected to the regular Republicans who would see in talk of Reconstruction a threat to their control of the state government could be expected to oppose the commission's work. Its creation, therefore, would have the dual effect of splitting the Republican Party and lining up with Smith those Republicans who exemplified progressivism and reform to independent voters. The support of such Republicans would help negate Smith's greatest handicap, the Tammany label he bore. See, I really need to know more about Tammany. Like, what is the deal with Tammany? I read the first 3 paragraphs of the Wikipedia article. I thought that would be enough. Clearly, it's not. I've just, every time they tell me something about Tammany, I thought Tammany was a good thing, you know, like that's how we got elected. Now it's like, oh, plus the Republicans are Tammany. I'm just totally, Robert Caro has done a masterpiece, but this has gone over my head. I don't understand exactly how Tammany fits into this. Anyway, okay, because now it's like, why is the Tammany label a handicap for him? I thought that was, anyway. In addition, she reminded the leaders the federal crowd were heavy campaign contributors. Before the motherly little, if I'm just like being dumb and I'm missing something, just let me know. But I'm just confused about Tammany. Before the motherly little woman had finished speaking, the roomful of politicians had realized that they were listening to a master politician. Al Smith had bought her suggestion on the spot. I got a coffee again today. I figured I needed it. Also, I got the app and there's kind of good deals in there. I'm quite embarrassed. Like, I used to really make fun of my friends in a friendly way when they had the apps of fast food restaurants. I just feel like it's kind of like admitting defeat if you get the McDonald's app on your phone. But I hate to say it, but The Dunkin' Donuts app has some really good deals. Yeah, exactly. The deals are great. It just does I don't know. I just like to think that I'm somebody that cooks a decent amount, a normal amount. But yeah, I don't know. I have the Dunkin' Donuts app and it's great. Reorganization of the state government was not a new idea. It had been a basic reform tenet for years, and in 1915, a Bureau of Municipal Research study, commissioned by a state constitutional convention, had found no fewer than 169 separate state departments, bureaus, boards, committees, and commissions, many with overlapping functions. Taxes, for example, being collected by 7 different agencies, public works being carried out by 10. Some agency heads were responsible to the governor, some to the legislature, some to officials who were themselves elected by the people and were hence not responsible to either governor or legislature. Some agency heads appointed by the governor were removable only by the legislature, and there seemed to be almost as many different procedures of removal as there were men who could be removed. His term was only 2 years, and the terms of some gubernatorial appointees were longer, so that each incoming governor was forced to entrust the carrying out of some of his policies to men appointed by previous governors, who might be politically opposed to him. Such nominal members of the executive department, as the state engineer, treasurer, and secretary of state, were not appointed but elected, and therefore, even if they were of the governor's party, did not owe their primary allegiance to the governor but to the voters, and could, if they wished, ignore his wishes with impunity. Most important, the study found that the governor possessed little real authority. Maybe it's just me. I feel like this section is so boring. Not he, but the chairman of the various committees of the reactionary and corrupt legislature controlled the state's purse. The document was called a state budget. The document that was called a state budget was actually a collection of appropriations drawn up by these chairmen. No legislature or any other state official reviewed the collection, balanced one appropriation against another, cut them down to agreed upon necessities, or measured them against estimated revenue. Even after the document was formally printed, individual legislatures continued to introduce their own private bills, generally for pork barrel public works projects, which required public expenditures, and these, when passed, did not even appear in the budget. This kind of reminds me of how no city government had any budget at all until 1900-ish. No one bothered to add them up so that when the legislature adjourned, no one could be sure how much money it had appropriated. The governor technically had the power to veto appropriations, but since state law forbade him to veto part of an appropriation item, legislators simply made sure that each debatable expenditure was lumped with one too essential to be vetoed. 1 second. The Bureau had become convinced that it was this lodging of administrative power in legislature, rather than governor, that, more than any other single fact, explained the utter failure of 20 years of effort by a succession of liberal governors, such as Roosevelt. I forgot Roosevelt was the governor. That would have been fun if we got to read about him. I mean, he was kind of bad, you know? Like, he was one of the presidents known for being quite racist, but he also was like an explorer. Teddy Roosevelt. There was a book I didn't read, but I kind of want to, and it's definitely shorter than this one and probably even more readable. And it was called, like, what was it called? Shoot, it was like Murder on the Nile or something by Candace Millard, but it's about Teddy Roosevelt like exploring exploring in South America. It sounds interesting. Anyway, though, we don't get to read about him because he came before FDR bio read-along when. I know. Maybe I should have started with a book that wasn't as big, and then I would have some momentum going. I'll finish this one, though. And also, I wouldn't have done a read aloud for a short book because I have no problem reading those by myself. I do that all the time. But the big, this is possible. I think this is definitely the biggest book I've ever read. Yeah, I feel bad about missing days, but then I had to give it up because if I start I don't know, caring a lot about missing days, then I'll just never finish. Okay, I'm gonna do 1 or 2 more paragraphs, but they're really big paragraphs, remember. Thanks you guys for coming. It's fun for me, especially on the days where today where I don't really do that much reading and do a lot of chatting. Very fun. Also, where in the world are you right now? I'm very curious. I'm in New York, in case you're wondering. It's really cloudy and kind of drizzly, but not that cold. Wisconsin. Where in Wisconsin? For the first time, I went to Madison, which is the only other place I'd been to in Wisconsin was Kenosha, which I went to as a kid because we went to a water park there, which was very fun. But I don't know. I was a kid. It was it felt very touristy. But then I went to Madison recently. Oh, nice. I went to Madison recently and I loved it. It was so fun. I was I just was kind of surprised. I was man, people are really sleeping on Madison, Wisconsin. But I have not ever been to Milwaukee, which feels I feel I should go at some point. Yeah, I went to college in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Madison was crazy because I was whoa, this feels exactly like Ann Arbor in terms of I don't know, just the university campus, the stuff, the vibe, the I don't know, scenery, weather. Although Madison is probably a little bit bigger and you have the Capitol there, which changes things. I liked it though. I was a fan. I feel as someone from Grand Rapids, I do feel quite at home in the upper Midwest, and I can imagine myself being very happy living in Madison. Also, Minneapolis, St. Paul, when I visited there, I was oh, I could live here for sure. And both of them are, well, I feel people say Minnesota is kind of affordable. People say that Madison's expensive, but I think that's just compared to the rest of Wisconsin. It's definitely cheaper than Brooklyn. Okay, back to this book that I just don't want to read. The governor technically had the power to okay. The Bureau had become convinced that it was this lodging of administrative power in legislature rather than governor that, more than any other single fact, explained the utter failure of 20 years of effort led by a succession of liberal governors such as Roosevelt and Hughes to increase the involvement of the state with the new needs of its people. Because the governor stood at the head of the state and represented all of its people rather than just one assembly or senate district, the governor must be held responsible if the state failed or moved as the voters wanted it to move. But going hand in hand with responsibility, the Bureau said, must be power. If a man was to be held responsible for moving government, he must be given power to move it. Quote, executive power commensurate with executive responsibility, unquote, in the Bureau's slogan. To get power in the hands of the executive, the Bureau recommended a centralization of governmental functions. The 169 agencies should be combined into 12 departments headed by men appointed by and removable by the governor, whose term should be lengthened to 4 years. This is really maybe it's just me, I'm just this is so in the weeds. An executive budget system should be instituted. Under it, department heads would submit financial requests to the governor, who would weigh the requests against the resources and needs of the state and propose an overall budget. Only then would the budget be submitted to the legislature, which would review it in a series of hearings that would ensure that the public could understand it, and then would have the power to reduce it by eliminating items. The governor would therefore be proposing the way the state was to be run. The legislature would be reviewing the proposal, and if the differences between legislature and governor proved irreconcilable, the public would settle them at the next election. Furthermore, after policy had been established, it was to be administered by the governor instead of by the legislature's many committee chairmen. The Bureau's 1915 report, Government of the State of New York, that's the name of the report, was 768 pages long, with reform leaders taking the floor to argue for its principles. Many of its key points were adopted by the Constitutional Convention. But Tammany and the upstate bosses outwitted the reformers by persuading them to combine all the proposed constitutional amendments in a single package, and distaste for one or two unpopular amendments, combined with a quiet mobilization of Tammany and upstate machines, resulted in the defeat of the package in a November 1915 referendum. Man, so we're keeping the 169 agencies, I guess. Bob Moses, who, as a bureau staffer, had worked on its 1915 report and who now, in his new job, recruited other staffers who had worked on the report, expected at first that the report of the Reconstruction Commission would be practically a duplication. But there was a bigger difference between working for the Bureau and working for Belle Moskowitz than sumptuousness of office arrangements. The Bureau made recommendations. Mrs. Moskowitz made laws. The Bureau got enthusiastic and excited. Mrs. Moskowitz got things done. And no sooner had her chief of staff begun work, 2 weeks before his 30th birthday, than she began to teach him how things got done. The lessons started almost immediately. Okay, now I think I'm actually going to do one more paragraph. Or two, depending on if it's a cliffhanger. The lesson started almost immediately. When Moses submitted a preliminary outline of suggested commission goals, he included a phrase straight out of the reform textbooks and his municipal civil service commission days. Quote, elimination of unnecessary personnel. Mrs. Moskowitz struck the phrase out. Personnel, she said, were voters. You didn't antagonize voters. When Moses, copying a 1915 Bureau recommendation, suggested that the unwieldy 10-member council, which ran the Department of Agriculture, be scrapped in favor of a single professional commissioner, she pointed out that the council memberships were distributed by the legislature and were among the choicest patronage posts it possessed. The governor, she said, would need the support of the legislature if his program were to be approved. The council, she said, would remain. The lessons were given in daily morning conferences. Moses would arrive brimming over with ideas and impatient for their approval. But the reception they received from Mrs. Moskowitz was somewhat different from the ones his ideas had been accorded by Mr. Moskowitz. Shoot, I really don't remember who Mr. Moskowitz is. I definitely remember the name, but there were so many dudes that were working in the Bureau. As Moses excitedly paced around her office, she would sit calmly, attentive but non-committal. When he finished, she usually would not say anything for several minutes. Often she would praise the ideas and break into a smile full of real pleasure at Moses's inventiveness. But equally often, Moses's ideas would be thrown out. There was a real divergence of opinion there, staffers recall. Moses was very theoretical, always wanting to do exactly what was right, trying to make things perfect, unwilling to compromise. She was more practical. She wanted to do the same things as Moses, but she wanted to concentrate on what was possible and not jeopardize the attaining of those things by stirring up trouble in other areas. And her decisions were always final. When Moses paced and argued, trying to change her mind, Mrs. Moskowitz would sit quietly and, when Moses had finished, um, would quietly repeat her earlier decision. There was never any question, recalls another staffer, that she was the boss. Okay, I kinda like this part. I'm gonna stop here, and I will restart tomorrow. My flight leaves, like, at this time tomorrow, so I can just do a little morning read. It'll be pretty fun. Thanks for thanks for listening. I fear that my, like, asides, which someone said in a comment that they liked, so that's why I started, doing them more. But I feel like lots of the time I'll just read something that someone does, and then I'll say like, "Hmm, sounds bad," which is like my boyfriend said that in movies I do that a lot in an annoying way. Like we were watching Goodfellas for the first time. It was my first time watching Goodfellas. He'd seen it before. And it's about gangsters in New York, and, like, whenever they did any crimes, I would just be like, "Man, like, I don't think they're very good people," and he was like, "Annie, you like, stop it. Movies are full of bad people." So, thanks for wishing me a nice flight. I'm excited. It'll be nice to be in the sun. Maybe the next time or maybe in 2 days, I'll be really tan. That could be fun. I have, like, a few things I wanna do in LA. Like, I've never been to the La Brea tar pits, which seem cool. There's a bunch of preserved stuff and animals. That might be fun. Also, I'm gonna be staying in, Silver Lake area, which I don't really know very well, so it'll be fun to see what's around. Yeah, I'm just excited, but see you later. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.